네, 이제 3시 3분이 돼서 시작하도록 하겠습니다. 다시 한번 인사드리겠습니다. 안녕하세요. 저는 드그루이터 출판사의 한국 대행사 JRM의 김혜영 차장입니다. 바쁘신 와중에 드그루이터 저널 워크숍에 참석해 주신 여러분께 감사의 말씀 드립니다. 오늘 워크숍은 2개 대학이 참여해 주셨고 약 50명 정도 등록을 해 주신 것으로 확인이 됩니다. 오늘 워크숍은 홍보 포스터에서 확인하신 대로 해외 출판사의 논문 투고 시 주의할 점 및 AI 세상에서의 연구 윤리에 대해 말씀드릴 예정입니다. 몇 가지 안내사항을 말씀드리고 워크숍을 시작하도록 하겠습니다. 첫째로 워크숍 진행 중 참석자분들은 자동으로 마이크는 음소거 상태이고 카메라는 꺼져 있는 상태이니 참고 부탁드립니다. 둘째로 질문이 있으신 분은 채팅창에 남겨주시면 워크숍 말미에 한꺼번에 답변을 드릴 수 있도록 하겠습니다. 채팅창에 글을 쓰실 때에는 모든 참석자가 볼 수 있도록 수신자를 모두로 설정해주고 적어주시기 바랍니다. 영어로 직접 질문하고 싶으신 분께서는 영어로 남겨주시면 강연자께서 나중에 확인 후 답변 주실 예정입니다. 셋째로 이 웨비나는 녹화되고 있으며 추후 녹화본이 공유될 수 있습니다. 오늘 웨비나를 등록해 주신 이메일로 녹화본 링크와 교육 자료를 발송해 드릴 예정입니다. 혹시라도 메일을 받지 못하셨다면 도서관 교육 담당자에게 요청해 주시기 바랍니다. 다음으로 추가 공지사항이 있어서 말씀드립니다. 드그루이터의 전자저널이 한국교육학술정보원 캐리스의 대학 라이선스 사업으로 선정되어 전국 대학에서 전자저널을 무료로 이용하실 수 있습니다. 각 대학교 도서관 홈페이지를 접속하셔서 확인해 주시기 바랍니다. 추가로 저희가 국내 연구자들에게 오픈액세스 저널 논문할 때 그 출판 비용이 발생하는 것 아티클 프로세싱 차지라고 하는데요. 그 해당 논문 쿠폰을 지금 무료로 제공해 드리는 사업을 다시 하고 있습니다. 자세한 정보는 학술 연구 정보 서비스 포털인 리스 홈페이지를 방문하시면 지금 보시는 화면과 같이 공지사항이 있습니다. 네, 관련해서 설명을 드리자면 대상 저널은 드그루이터의 하이브리드 저널 약 290여 종, 지원 대상은 드그루이터 출판사의 저널에 오픈 액세스 논문 투고를 원하는 국내 연구자, 지원 기간은 2023년 7월부터 2024년 6월까지 1년간이고요. 지원 규모는 연간 30건의 무료 쿠폰이 있습니다. 2,000유로 상당의 APC를 무료로 지원해드리니까 선착순으로 필요하신 분들은 사용해 주시기 바랍니다. 참고로 말씀드리면 작년에도 이 30건의 쿠폰이 저희가 본 사업을 진행했었는데 그 선착순으로 모두 마감이 됐습니다. 그래서 올해도 지금 한 3건 정도 사용하셨고 한 27건 정도 남아 있어서 필요하신 분들은 리스 홈페이지 참조하셔서 사용해 주시기 바랍니다. 네, 외국인 학생들이 있을 수 있어서 영어로도 안내 말씀 보여드립니다. 네, 그러면 오늘 강연을 해주실 오늘의 강연자를 소개해드리도록 하겠습니다. 그 이분은 가이 에드워드라는 분이시고요. 현재 드그루이터 출판사의 링귀스틱 앤 휴머니티 부분의 시니어 저널 매니저를 맡고 계십니다. 그 출판사에서 업무 경력이 한 20년 정도 되셨고요. 과거에는 옥스퍼드 대학교 출판사, 그리고 피어슨, 팔그레이브 맥밀란 같은 그 유명한 학술 출판사에서 근무하신 경력이 있습니다. 논문 투고 절차와 연구 윤리에 대해 그 누구보다 전문적인 지식을 갖고 계신 분이기 때문에 오늘 강연을 들으시면 많은 도움을 받으실 수 있을 거라고 생각됩니다. 저 멀리 영국에서 그 시차를 이겨내시고 아침 일찍 일어나서 저희를 위해서 준비해 주고 계시거든요. 그럼 지금부터 워크숍을 시작해 보도록 하겠습니다. Guy, over to you.
Hey Young. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen. Hey Young, is that okay?
Yeah, okay, we can see.
Perfect. Thank you. And thank you so much for the introduction. So good afternoon to everybody. Good morning for me here in the UK. It's quite early here. A very warm welcome to you all, and thank you for attending today. I've been asked to talk to you today about research integrity and publication ethics. So, as Heyong said, my name is Guy. I'm a senior journal manager with the Gruyter. I joined the company this summer, but as you just saw, I have about 20 years of experience in academic publishing. I was with Oxford University Press for the last 7 years before I just joined the Gruyter. And before that, I was also with Pearson and Palgrave Macmillan. So I have a lot of experience with journals, and hopefully today I can give you some tips for the type of things that journal editors and publishers are looking for from authors in terms of research integrity, and the kind of things that you should think about when submitting your article to a journal. So firstly, just a quick word about the company De Gruyter. So we have been around a long time. We were founded over 270 years ago. We have offices in Berlin, Boston, Beijing, and all across Europe. And our mission, you can see that our slogan, our motto for the company is, "We want to know." And our mission is to use that global presence, that global reach that we have, to promote and disseminate and advance knowledge as much as possible. So our objective when you publish with us is to give your journal article or your book the maximum visibility and the maximum impact. Personally, I work on the humanities side of our publishing program. But as you see here, we also publish across all major areas, including life science, medicine, physical science, engineering, and technology. We publish over 120 open access journals. As you know, or as you probably know, the journals world is moving more and more towards open access as the primary business model, away from subscriptions. And De Gruyter has a plan to move nearly all of our journals to open access over the coming years. I encourage you, if you haven't already, please check out degruyter.com. You will find there a whole program of thousands of ebooks and journal articles across all areas. Some very quick numbers. We publish over 1,500 new books every year. Across our subscription journals and our open access journals, we have over 400 journals. And you see, we also publish many databases and other works. So our agenda for today, as I said, I'm going to talk about publication ethics. So why do publication ethics matter, and research integrity? Why is this important? So following ethical guidelines means that the research, the journal article that you publish, will be authentic. It will be as free of errors as possible. And this will help with credibility and visibility for your work within the academic community. It's very important that you stick to ethical guidelines when you write your journal article. And today, like I said, I'm going to talk about some of the things that publishers and journal editors are looking for in terms of ethics. So I'm going to talk about an introduction to the Committee on Publication Ethics, COPE. We'll talk about authorship and contributions and what it means to be an author. We'll talk about some of the misconduct issues that can come up if authors are not careful, with plagiarism or redundant publication, conflicts of interest. We will cover a little bit about the peer review process, things like paper mills and other types of misconduct. We will talk about corrections and retractions and removals. So this is what happens if we find a problem after a paper is published. We'll talk about complaints and the appeals process, data and article sharing, the question of copyright, and we'll finish up with some top tips. And also, I hope that we'll have some time at the end for your questions. So firstly, I wanted to talk about the Committee on Publication Ethics, or COPE. So COPE is an independent organization which works with all academic publishers and other interested parties within the publishing process. So De Gruyter follows COPE guidelines. Essentially, they have created a set of guidelines and best practice for what to do if there's plagiarism in a paper, what to do if various things occur or any problems in the publication process, so that we have common standards across all publishers. So the mission of COPE is to educate and advance knowledge and to safeguard the integrity of scholarly work. So COPE is committed to not just working with us as publishers, but also with authors to support authors in publishing your journal article in the most ethical way possible and to create those ethical practices and those guidelines that I talked about. So a very quick warm-up question before we move on. The question here is, submitting a manuscript to more than one journal at a time is A, that's okay, because it can take many months to get a peer review sometimes, or B, that's not allowed in any circumstance. So maybe if I could just ask you to put your answer A or B into the chat, and I will wait for a minute.
네, 지금 그 화면에 보시면 퀘스천이 하나 있는데요. 그 저널 아티클에 저널 논문을 내실 때 하나 이상의 저널에 제출해도 되는지 안 되는지 답변을 A, B로 채팅 박스에 남겨주시기 바랍니다. 네, A는 한 번에 이제 저널을 여러 군데에 보내는 게 허용이 된다. B는 한 번에 여러 군데 보내는 게 허용이 안 된다. 이렇게 이제 나와 있거든요. 네, 적극적으로 참여 부탁드립니다. 네, 그 답변을 남기실 때 수신자를 모두로 해주셔야 됩니다. 지금 답변 주신 분들이 호스트와 토론자에게만 답변을 그 채팅박스에 남겨주셨거든요. 그래서 채팅박스에 수신자를 모두로 선택해 주시고 다시 한번 답변 좀 부탁드립니다. 호스트 및 토론자 외에는 선택이 안 된다고요? 거기 밑에 모두 안 보이실까요, 혹시? 저희 네,
Thank you,
한번
Haeyeon.
확인해. Guy, I think they have some problem with the chat box because they want to show the answer for all to share, but they don't have the option for all. They just can send the chat box to only host and the attendee. So
Problem
let me
at all.
check with
So
Larvinia.
that's
Larvinia, are
okay.
you there? That's okay? Okay, so some people answered A or B. Some people answered A or B. Can you read the chat box?
That's okay. So I will move ahead with the answer to the question. So the answer is B. That is not advised or not allowed in any circumstance. So we understand that with publishers and journal editors, the process can take time, but it's really important to only submit your journal article to one journal at a time and then wait for a decision. The reason for this is that, as you all know, journals receive many submissions. Journal editors are very busy. Peer reviewers are very busy. They get asked to review a lot of papers. So to make sure that we use people's time in the right way and not waste people's time, we should only submit the journal article to one journal at a time. But thank you for participating there. So the first thing I'm going to talk about now is authorship and contributions. So from the journal perspective, what does it mean to be an author? So who should be named as an author on a journal article? So the advice here is that to be listed as an author on a journal article, it should only be those researchers who made a significant contribution to the work. So either in the conception or the design or the execution or the actual writing of the study. So anybody who made that contribution should be listed as an author. There will be other people who may have, for example, a lab assistant who helped to create some data. They should be named in an acknowledgement section in the article, but not as an author if they didn't make a significant contribution. Really, the key thing here is that authors should every author on every paper should see and approve the final version of the paper and agree to the lead author submitting it to the journal. So we do see some examples of misconduct here, where sometimes people will add an extra author who did not contribute to the work, or sometimes there is a problem where somebody who did contribute to the work is left off of the list of authors. So that can be a problem, and sometimes these things are reported to us as the publisher. We will always investigate those and do our best to resolve any disputes between authors. A big topic at the moment, of course, is artificial intelligence. So we do see occasionally the request to include ChatGPT or another large language model, another artificial intelligence tool, as an author on a paper. So the rule here is that an AI tool cannot be the author of a paper, so you couldn't list it as one of the contributors to the paper, because an artificial intelligence can't take responsibility for what is written. It's only saying what it has learned from other sources. So although an artificial intelligence tool cannot be an author, of course, it is okay to use an AI tool in the preparation of your paper. These tools can be very useful. In many ways, they are transforming the landscape for how research can be done in future. The important thing for us as publishers is that if an AI tool has been used to help prepare a manuscript, or in the coding or in preparing the data, there must be transparency. It must be disclosed in the materials or methods section of the paper to explain, this is how we used AI and this is the tool that we used. So it's completely open about what the author did and what the AI tool did. So I'm going to talk now about some of the other problems that we see with misconduct in the publishing process. Firstly, plagiarism. So plagiarism is, as you know, using other people's content without permission. So this can apply to all types of content. It's not just the words, it can be images or other media that is reproduced in an article. If you are using sources from other people's work, you must fully acknowledge and attribute that. Otherwise, there is a risk that you could be accused of plagiarism. So if you're using material from another source, you must always cite it correctly. And in some cases, if you're using third-party material, you may need to apply for permission from the original publisher to reuse that content. So Gruyter does not tolerate plagiarism at all, and this is the same with all of our other publishers and the other publishers that I've worked with in the past. We use plagiarism detection software in the same way that I'm sure you do with your students to check that there is no overlap or similarity with work that has already been published. And if that does come up, then an author would be asked to explain why the material is duplicated. It's also possible to self-plagiarize. And this is, again, not advised and not allowed. So what we're talking about here is author reusing big section of a previously published article and publishing it again in a new article. So of course, it's okay to build on the work that you previously published, but using verbatim a whole section of an old article is considered to be a form of self-plagiarism. And again, that would not comply with the Gruyter policies. Multiple redundant or concurrent publication So this is where the same article is submitted and published in 2 journals. And as we were saying with that question, again, this is considered very bad practice, and all the research should be original. So we shouldn't be publishing the same research in more than 1 journal, or splitting one study into several parts and submitting it across 2 journals so that you achieve 2 publications. Again, that's considered not to be an original piece of work. Conflicts of interest. So it's very important that any conflicts of interest are disclosed when a journal article is submitted to a publisher. So that might be a financial interest or a personal interest or professional. So if you're working for a company at the same time as a university, you might have a conflict of interest with the research that you're doing. The important thing there is, again, transparency. So making sure that if there are any potential conflicts of interest with submitting a paper, you state that when you submit the paper to the journal. The editor and the peer reviewers will be aware of that, and they can take that conflict of interest into account when they make their decision on a paper. So the peer review process, as you all know, is very important to us as publishers. It ensures that there is good quality and originality in the work. It helps you as authors to improve your work with good feedback. Again, there are some risks for publishers with the potential for manipulation or misconduct in the peer review process. And again, this is something that we monitor very carefully. So we do see examples of peer review being manipulated. So this is essentially using a dishonest practice to influence the assessment of a piece of scholarly work. So again, going back to COPE, the organization which creates these guidelines for good practice, they have recommendations for publishers if we suspect that peer review is being manipulated. So the next slide shows this is what a journal editor will do when you submit your work to a paper, when you submit your work to a journal. The first stage there is at the submission stage. The journal will require that the author submits the manuscript to the journal themselves. We would ask in step 2 here, it's best that you use a university or a professional email address rather than a Gmail or any other kind of personal email address. Then it's easier for us as publisher to verify that you're a legitimate researcher. Also, if you have an ORCID ID, so for those of you that don't know, the ORCID ID is a unique reference number that you can apply for that stays with you throughout your academic career. Those ORCID IDs, again, help us to identify and verify legitimate academic authors. We see some problems with maybe some journals that you've submitted to in the past. You may have seen that some journals ask authors to suggest potential peer reviewers that could help with their paper. Journal editors will always check that those peer reviewers are legitimate. We do see some problems where people might suggest a fake reviewer or a friend. We do have ways of detecting this, particularly with the fake reviewers. We have ways of checking IP addresses and so on. I have seen in the past an example of a peer review which came back within 2 minutes of the reviewer being asked, and they said it was the best paper ever. Of course, that's impossible. There's no way that the peer reviewer could have looked at the paper in 2 minutes. So publishers are aware of these things, and we look at the peer review process very carefully to make sure that the integrity is there. And that helps you as authors as well, because obviously the more comprehensive feedback you get, the better your paper is going to be. It is possible to appeal a peer review decision. So if you don't agree with what the peer reviewer has said to the journal editor, it's possible to contact the journal editor. You should do that in writing, clearly explaining any reason why you disagree with the peer review decision and providing any evidence against what the peer reviewer has said, if you're able to do so. Also to provide any new information or data that you would like the journal editor to consider with the appeal. Generally, editors will only consider one appeal per article, and then the decision is final. But the appeal process is there. Also, it's possible to contact the publisher. So if you feel that the journal editor has not been fair in some way, you can escalate and contact us here at the Gruyter or the other publisher of a journal and explain the situation, and we will investigate further. I wanted to talk very briefly about paper mills. So paper mills are basically where academics are being sold research. So it's basically fake papers that are being sold for easy publication. Again, publishers have processes to identify these paper mills. If we're seeing a lot of article submissions with similar titles or from same IP address, or there are various methods that we use, and we talk to other publishers as well to ensure that the risk of paper mills is as low as possible. Other types of potential misconduct that I will speak briefly about: falsification or fabrication of data. Again, this is considered unacceptable, and papers will be rejected or retracted if data fabrication is found. So the definition of data fabrication is intentional misinterpretation of research results. So it might be a fake experiment, or it might be reporting data that didn't actually happen so that an author can show the results that they want to show. Mostly peer reviewers will pick this up in the process. Another problem that we see is with image manipulation, for example, in medical journals, where an image of a cell, for example, might be manipulated, or parts of the cell image might be duplicated to show, again, the result that the author wants us to see. Again, we have tools and methods to detect this falsification or fabrication of data, and if that's found, the paper is not acceptable and would be rejected or retracted. We also sometimes see citation manipulation where authors self-cite themselves to inflate their own citation count, their H-index, for example, or sometimes we see that journal editors might ask an author to cite other papers that are published in the same journal. Again, these things are not acceptable, and if a journal editor asks you to do something like that, you should report it to the publisher. So I'm going to talk now about the process for if a mistake or a problem is found with an article after it's already published. So there are three options here: a correction, a retraction, or a removal of the article after publication. So corrections, everybody makes mistakes, and that doesn't mean that the author did it on purpose. It might be that after the article is published, you suddenly find that there was a mistake in the data, or some other problem might come to light, which is perfectly fine and legitimate. If that happens, you should notify the editor of the journal as soon as possible. They will work with the publisher and with you as the author to put a correction notice online. The correction notice will be linked to the original online version of the article, so that if anybody ever reads the paper, they will see the original paper, but they will also see the correction notice, which will be linked to it online. So if there was any problem with the paper, it's all there together for readers. There are two options here, an erratum or a corrigendum. So that depends if the mistake was made by the author, or sometimes the publisher makes a mistake, or something might be left out by mistake. We will again correct that with a correction notice. Retraction is more serious. So we would only retract a paper if there is such big problem with the paper that we cannot rely on that piece of research. So if there is an ethical problem, so if the paper was found to be plagiarized, or if there was some problem with the data, for example, in a medical journal that meant that bad advice is given, and the paper is just too much of a problem to stay online, there is a process to retract the paper and remove it from the journal. Again, if you spot a serious problem with your paper after publication, the most important thing to do is communicate with the journal editor, and then we can work towards what the best solution might be. Is it a correction or is it a retraction? Retraction is really the last resort. So that's, we will only retract a paper if it has very serious problems, like you see listed here on this slide. Removal of a paper is a little bit different to a retraction. And again, this is a very exceptional circumstance where we might have to remove an article from online publication for a legal reason. So, for example, if there's anything that breaches personal privacy or confidentiality. Again, the example here might be a medical journal where the author is talking about a particular paper, a particular patient, and that patient identity could be guessed from the information that's given. For legal reasons, then we would remove the paper rather than retract it, and we would publish a notice online to say why the article was removed. So this complaints procedure that I was talking about before, just to repeat, if we do receive any complaints from authors, de Gruyter will investigate. We have an ethics committee with experts in-house that have a lot of experience with dealing with these kind of problems and complaints. We would also refer to COPE as the guidance body in the field of publishing. As I mentioned before, we may also contact other journals or publishers, for example, in those cases of duplicate publication. We take complaints very seriously. Sometimes they're made anonymously, sometimes the individual identifies themselves. Whenever we receive a complaint, we will treat the person that makes the complaint with professionalism and respect. And of course, we always ask the same in return. A quick point about data and article sharing. So in the same way that journals are moving towards open access, we're moving towards policies of sharing as much data as possible. So we think this is a good thing because when research data is as available as possible, it helps to back up the integrity, the robustness of the published article. It also helps other researchers to replicate the results. We support open data policies as much as possible. The other thing that we've seen with sharing research data alongside the published paper, it also helps with the impact of the research. We find that papers that publish the data tend to get more downloads, sometimes more citations. So the discoverability of the paper is helped by open data. So if it's appropriate to do so, if you have permission from your employer or your funder, we encourage the sharing of data. As best practice to help others to understand that data, we suggest that authors create a data management plan to map out how you're generating the data and how you're curating and storing it. So the data might be not stored on the publisher platform. It might be in a subject repository and you as authors will know the best subject repositories for your particular area of expertise. It's also important for authors to maintain accurate records of the process of how you generated this data. That helps with transparency and that helps with replication. So if somebody comes to the study later on and wants to verify how the experiment or the research project was carried out, the open data processes really help with that. Most journals increasingly will have a data availability statement as part of the publication process. So this is an additional statement that comes with the journal article that explains to others, to readers and other researchers, how they can access the relevant data. Sharing versions of your article. So there are different ways. So with Gruyter, we have a set of policies for sharing your article, a version of it before publication or after publication. You will find those policies on the Gruyter website. If you're publishing with a different publisher, everybody has similar policies. There will be some slight difference from one publisher to another. So the important thing is to check the publisher website so that you know what the policy about sharing your article is and where you can share it and when. And of course, with an open access article, you retain the right as an author to share that article much more widely than if it's in a subscription journal. If you are using any third-party material, so going back to that point I made quite early on in the presentation, if you're using material that has already been published elsewhere, it's really important that you firstly acknowledge and cite that material correctly, but also there may be permission that's required from the original publisher to reuse that material in your article. That is possible. And for an example here, if you wanted to use material from a De Gruyter article in an article with another publisher, we have a copyright clearance center process where you can apply for permission to do so. Other publishers have similar processes. So it's really important to make sure that you have the right to use any material that you are publishing in your article. And that leads me on to copyright. So copyright, as you will know from the journal articles that you have probably published already, authors are required to sign a copyright agreement when you publish a paper with De Gruyter or another publisher. Essentially, what that does is gives us as the publisher the permission to utilize the content in the journal or to translate it, for example, or essentially to disseminate it through the various channels that we have to make sure that the article is as widely accessible as possible. For open access publications, the author retains the copyright in their work. And essentially what happens with an open access article is that the author is granting us, the publisher, a license to use the article. And these CC BY licenses tend to be the standard for open access. The author then retains the copyright, and you can also post that article in other places as well as the journal. So I'm going to finish with a few top tips. So for your publication, I'll do the don't list first. So don't dismiss the instructions for authors. It's really important that you look at the journal website, look at the aims and scope of the journal to make sure that the paper that you're submitting fits with the journal. Make sure that you are submitting your article in the correct format, which will always be detailed in the instructions for authors. Make sure that any conflicts of interest are stated, as I said before. Don't forget about what we were just covering with obtaining permissions for any third-party materials or any copyright that you need to clear. We do sometimes see that authors send the incorrect version of the paper and then need to update it. So always make sure that you're sending the most up-to-date version of the paper when you submit it to the journal. As we said with that question, please don't submit your journal article to more than one journal at a time. And then with the do's, so do make sure that you follow journal format, follow those instructions for authors on the journal website as closely as possible. Again, please submit your manuscript only to one journal at a time. Make sure that all work is properly attributed and cited. Follow those ethical policies and guidelines that we have covered in this presentation. If you have a funding source or any other relationships that need to be acknowledged in the paper, make sure that you include those in the article submission. And I think this is maybe the most important thing in this list of things to do. If you have any questions at all, please contact the publisher. We are always happy to help with any questions that the authors might have, because that helps you, but it also helps us. Okay, so I think that's everything that I wanted to cover in the presentation. So I will stop sharing my screen there, and maybe Hey Young, do we have any questions in the chat, or maybe we could open up the floor for anything that people want to ask.
네, 질문이 있으신 분은 채팅 박스에 남겨주시기 바랍니다. 약간의 오해가 있었는데 이게 참석하신 분들은 수신자를 모두로 설정할 수 없도록 저희가 줌 세팅을 했다고 합니다. 네, 앞서 말씀드린 부분은 양해를 부탁드리고요. 그냥 호스트와 토론자에게 볼 수 있도록 채팅을 남겨주시면 다 같이 읽어서 제가 읽어드리고 질문을 공유하도록 하겠습니다. 네, 저희가 몇 년 동안 이 전어 워크숍을 진행하면서 늘 겪는 경우인데 한 분이 먼저 질문을 하기 시작하시면 계속 하시더라고요. 네, 용기 있는 분의 첫 질문 기다리고 있겠습니다. 네, 질문이 하나 들어왔습니다. 2개 이상의 저널에 논문을 제출했을 때 어떤 리스크가 있는지 물어보셨습니다. Guy, there is a question about the submitting one article to multiple journals. What is the actual risk for the authors?
So the risk is, I have seen examples in the past where if an article is submitted to more than one journal and the journal editor finds out about this. So for example, I've seen examples in the past where a paper is submitted, it goes all the way through peer review, it gets to the decision, and then the author says, oh, I'm sorry, we already decided to publish this somewhere else. So you can see that the journal editor is not going to be happy about that. And the risk to the author is, in some cases, that the journal editor may decide not to consider future submissions from that author. So there is a potential risk there.
Okay. 네, 방금 이제 예를 하나 들어주셨는데 한 저자가 여러 가지 2개의 저널에 이제 논문을 제출해가지고 한 출판사에서 이제 그 매뉴스크립트를 이제 리뷰를 하고 이제 출판을 결정해야겠다고 이제 그 저자한테 알렸더니 이 저자가 우리는 다른 출판사랑 저널을 출판하기로 했다 이렇게 뭐 말씀을 하셨대요. 그런 경우에는 이제 이 한 출판사는 그동안 한 일이 이제 헛수고가 되는 거죠. 그 피어 리뷰 과정 같은 것들이 쉽지 않고 한데 시간 낭비도 하고 그래서 그럴 경우에 이제 이 저자가 갖는 리스크 같은 경우는 이 거절당한 출판사에서 나중에 그 저자가 아무리 좋은 내용의 연구를 다시 제출하더라도 그 나중에 이제 피어 리뷰나 이런 과정을 그냥 받아들이지 않을 수 있다는 거죠. 네, 그런 부분이 리스크가 될 수 있다고 답변해 주셨습니다. 그러니까 꼭 그 저널 논문을 제출하실 때는 한 저널에 한 번에 한 곳에만 그 제출하시라고 거듭 강조를 하셨습니다. 네. 그리고 두 번째 두 번째 질문이 있어서요. 저널에서의 응답이 오랫동안 돌아오지 않는다면 언제쯤 투고를 취소를 하는 것이 적절할까요? 네. 이런 비슷한 문의가 또 어제 세션에서 있었어 가지고 네, 한번 문의해 보도록 하겠습니다. Guy, there is a question about the author submits the article to the one journal and she hasn't got any reply from the editor. Then does she have to cancel the submission or does she have to wait more? What is the good suggestion for her?
Yeah. So this can be difficult. Like I said before, journal editors are very busy. They receive a lot of submissions. They receive a lot of emails. But at the same time, it's very important that they communicate with authors. And in this particular case, it sounds like the author has been waiting for some time. If that's the case, it's fine to send a polite reminder, firstly to the journal editor, to ask what is the status of my paper. And if you still do not receive an answer at that point, then contact the publisher, and then we can talk to the journal editor and work out what is happening. That there is a possibility to withdraw your paper. If you feel that it's taking too long, then the best thing to do is to withdraw the paper, and then of course you're free to submit it to another journal. That's an extreme circumstance. We would hope that that doesn't happen, but I think the key here is communication. So it's important that journal editors keep people up to date.
네. 그 저널 에디터한테 직접 연락을 하는 게 제일 좋은 방법이라고 하셨는데요. 가능하면 좀 공손한 그런 그 리마인더를 일단 먼저 보내달라고 하셨고, 에디터한테 메일을 보냈는데도 답변이 안 온다면은 그 출판사로 직접 문의를 하는 것도 도와드릴 수 있는 방법이라고 하거든요. 그리고 추가로 그 답변을 드리자면은 어제도 인제 다른 학교에서 이제 문의가 왔었는데 그 논문 투고를 하고 4개월 반이 지났는데도 인제 에디터한테 연락이 안 와 가지고 근데 이런 경우에는 어떻게 해야 되냐고 문의를 하셨는데 그 어떤 학계의 분야에 그 논문을 투고하셨는지도 중요하다고 해요. 왜냐면은 과학기술 분야 같은 경우는 매일매일 빠른 연구들이 인제 진행되고 하다 보니까 그 리뷰어 같은 거 찾는 게 생각보다 쉬울 수 있는데 사회과학 분야 같은 경우는 좀 연구 주제들이 좀 이렇게 특화되어 있고 그래서 그 출판사 안에서도 그 인력 풀 안에서 리뷰어를 찾는 게 좀 오래 걸려서 답변이 좀 늦게 오는 경우도 있다고 하셨거든요. 그래서 그 부분도 한번 고려를 해 주시면 좋을 것 같습니다. 네. 그리고 또 다른 질문이 하나 영어로 들어와서 제가 직접 읽어 드리겠습니다. There is an English question in the chat box, so I'll just read it out. Thank you for your lecture. Is there any more explanation or a lecture regarding AI? I've just found your lecture is about general information regarding conventional publication processes. So can you add more AI something?
Oh yeah, I mean AI. I think we could talk about AI for hours. There is so much that's happening, and it's accelerating. It's happening more quickly, and I think so. Today, the purpose of our lecture was to talk about research integrity and publication ethics. So today, I just talk about AI in the context of the ethical questions about how to use AI and how to disclose that to the publisher or to the journal editor. And I think just to repeat what I said before, it's really important that if you are using an AI tool, that it's transparent about how you are using it and what you have done with AI in the paper. We don't think that AI is a bad thing. AI is going to transform academic research and academic publishing, and it's going to be fascinating to see how things will develop over the coming years. I probably don't have time to talk in detail about all aspects of artificial intelligence today, but it's something that publishers are engaging with more and more, not just from the author side. So obviously there are tools that you as authors can use to help generate your research, but there are tools that we are developing or are being developed by publishers, for example, to help us find the right peer reviewer for a paper. Using AI can really help with speeding up the process. So there's going to be a lot of change in the years to come, and maybe we'll do a separate lecture about that someday.
아, 네. 오늘 그 내용 자체가 AI에 대해서 조금 이렇게 심도 있게 다루진 못해서 죄송하다는 말씀 먼저 드리고요. 오늘은 일단 기본적으로 연구 논문 출판할 때 출판 윤리 쪽에서 관련된 AI에 대해서만 좀 다룰 수 있었다고. 네, 이제 AI 관련된 내용들이 계속 업데이트되고 있기 때문에 나중에 이제 필요하시면 관련된 내용으로 또 다른 세션을 한번 진행할 수 있도록 해보겠다고 답변해 주셨습니다. 네, 만약에 너무 AI와 관련된 내용을 기대하셨다면 조금 양해의 말씀 부탁드리겠습니다. 네, 혹시 또 다른 질문 있는 분 있으실까요? 질문이 지금 추가로 나오진 않고 있는데 다른 대학교에서 또 이제 질문이 나왔던 거에 대해서 한 가지 한번 공유를 해드리도록 하겠습니다. 이게 모두에게 도움이 되실 것 같아서 논문 출판하는데 투고 비용이 발생하냐, 출판 비용이 발생하냐고 물어보신 분이 계셨어요. 그래서 원래 이제 전통적으로는 이제 저널 논문 출판할 때 저자에게 비용이 발생하지는 않습니다. 네, 그래서 그냥 학계의 지식을 공유하는 차원에서 이제 이루어지는 행위이기 때문에 비용이 발생하진 않는데요. 저희가 이 웨비나 초반에 오픈 액세스 저널 출판에 대해서 간단하게 말씀을 드렸었는데, 오픈 액세스 저널의 오픈 액세스 아티클을 논문을 출판하실 경우에는 저자가 출판료를 내셔야 합니다. 그래서 왜냐하면은 내 저널을 이제 출판사에 이제 저널 논문을 내고 싶다 이렇게 하는 거기 때문에 저자가 내 거를 오픈하고 싶다 이렇게 요청을 하는 거기 때문에 그럴 경우에는 이제 저자한테 논문 출판 비용이 발생합니다. 그래서 저희가 지금 아까 말씀드린 대로 지원해드리는 사업이 저자에게 약 2,000유로 상당의 논문 출판 비용을 대드린다고 아까 말씀드린 거거든요. 그래서 그럴 경우에만 오픈 액세스 저널에 그러니까 하이브리드 저널 혹은 오픈 액세스 저널에 오픈 액세스 아티클을 논문을 제출하실 때만 출판 비용이 발생한다는 점 추가로 설명해 드리도록 하겠습니다. 그리고 또 제일 많이 나왔던 질문 중 하나는 논문을 투고하고 출판되기까지의 기간에 대해서 많이 문의를 하셨거든요. 그래서 이거에 대한 답변은 논문마다 다르다 이렇게 답변을 해주셨어요. 그래서 어떤 분야의 어떤 저널에 논문을 출판하는지에 따라 리뷰어가 이제 리뷰를 하고 에디터가 그런 것들을 확인하는 시간이 다 다르기 때문에 다르다고 하셨어요. 예를 들어서 작년, 재작년 같은 경우는 이제 우리가 전염병에 대한 그런 커다란 이슈가 있었잖아요. 그런 경우에는 코로나라든지 이런 거에 대해서 이제 활발하게 연구가 이루어지기 때문에 그런 경우는 빨리빨리 이제 리뷰가 되고 이제 디시전이 결정되고 해서 이제 논문이 2, 3주 안에도 바로바로 나오는 경우가 있고요. 또 이제 그렇지 않은 경우에는 아까 말씀드린 대로 인력풀이 좀 부족한 그런 학계에서 이제 논문을 출판될 경우에는 한 달이 걸릴 수도 있고 2달, 3달까지 걸릴 수 있다고 그렇게 논문마다 다르다고 설명해 주셨습니다. 그래서 그 부분도 논문 투고하시는 분들은 참고하시면 좋을 것 같습니다. 혹시 추가 질문 없으실까요? 네, 그럼 저희가 오늘은 약 1 시간 정도로 계획된 그 웨비나이기 때문에 이쯤에서 오늘 종료를 하도록 하고, 추가로 나중에 문의 사항이 있으시면 도서관 쪽으로 통해서 연락 주셔도 되고, 뭐 저희 출판사 쪽으로 문의 주셔도 답변 드릴 수 있을 것 같습니다. Guy, I think we can wrap it up today. So could you please say goodbye to everyone?
Yes, well, thank you so much for attending today. Thank you for listening. It's been a pleasure to talk to you all, and I wish you all a very good day.
네, 그러면 오늘 여기서 종료하도록 하겠습니다. 모두 참석해 주셔서 감사합니다. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.